The lightweight division, it has truly evolved since the beginning days of the UFC, or even the early days of mixed martial arts. No one was interested in watching lighter guys fight, when instead, they can watch Goliaths like Fedor, Coleman, or Crow Cup knock each other's heads off. It took a while for the lightweight division to gain steam, but before we knew it, it quickly became the most competitive and stacked division of the organization. The current monsters such as Khabib, Tony, and Gaethje truly demonstrate the competitiveness in the division, as all three men are capable of being UFC champions. Even looking down the list, there are always new faces and athletes crawling up the list into the top rankings of the division. Penn, Frankie, Edgar, and now Khabib are just some of the names that we think of when we ask, who are the greatest champions of all time in this division? However, how about when asked who are the worst champions of all time? A few may instantly come to the minds of the hardcore, long-time fans, but a lot has changed. And thus today, I'm Sasha Mox, and I'm jumping over the cage to talk to you about the 5 worst lightweight champions in UFC history. Before going into the list, here's a consideration for a person who almost made it but not quite. Gents Pulver seems to be everyone's go-to when trying to figure out who is the worst lightweight champion. Now, it may not have the prettiest record overall, sitting at 27 wins, 19 losses. However, if we are strictly looking at his time in the UFC, his record is 6 wins, 2 losses. He won the belt by beating Kyle Uno at UFC 30 and actually defended the belt successfully 2 times, which is more than all the people on this list. His first title defense wasn't that impressive, defeating Dennis Hallman via unanimous decision, but not even 4 months later, he picked up a majority decision victory over Penn for his second title defense. Pulver is a person who opened the door for the lighter fighters in this sport that at that time was heavily dominated by bigger, heavier fighters. A true patriot for the 155-pound division, his time in the UFC will mostly be remembered for one of the best seasons of The Ultimate Fighter, or his surprising KO loss to the complete newcomer Joe Lauzon, who was a former contestant on that season that Pulver coached. However, we do not think he is one of the worst champions and should be given a little bit more respect. Although he did leave the UFC after beating Penn over contract disputes, that is for a different video. Make sure to like this video if you do enjoy it and subscribe to the channel. But if you like this video and it gets 50 likes, I will make sure to create a top 5 best UFC lightweight champions in the UFC history. Number 5, Rafael Dos Anjos. At number 5 of our list, we have the Brazilian Rafael Dos Anjos. Now, let me just start by saying I don't really think RDA is bad per se. It's just tough to find 5 UFC lightweight champions who are considered the worst, and our advanced analytics lab have concluded that RDA makes this list at the 5th spot. RDA has had the journeyman career of a UFC fighter. Unsuccessful debut, to broken jaw injuries, to then getting purely dominated by a promotional newcomer, some chump named Khabib. RDA has had his ups and downs in his career as an MMA fighter. Say what you will about Dos Anjos, but he never gave up on himself or his sight for gold. After his loss to Khabib, RDA found what's inside and put together a 3-fight win streak, defeating Jason High, former champ Benson Henderson, and super awesome primed up Nate Diaz. He then fought Anthony Pettis and utterly dominated Pettis to win the belt at UFC 185 on March 14th. He then was able to actually defend it against Donald Choke on Big Fight Cerrone. He of course eventually lost the belt to Eddie Alvarez, which we'll probably get into later, spoiler. RDA can be seen as someone who merely won the belt at a time where the lightweight division exhausted their resources and newcomers were still crawling their way into the division. His loss to Eddie Alvarez was a little surprising, but regardless, a single title defense is good enough, right? Number 4, Anthony Pettis. Yes, you read that correctly. Anthony Pettis is even when it comes to his win-loss record in the UFC. If you were a time traveler who had a time machine and used said time machine to go back in time to 2013 and tell me Anthony Pettis would be a struggling fighter bouncing between the featherweight, lightweight, and welterweight division, I would definitely put the bong down. But here we are, and the former champion finds himself at number 4 of our ultimate prestigious list. The obvious answer is that he lost to number 5, but let's go a bit deeper on Pettis' journey within the lightweight division. A young, exciting fighter was making waves in WEC. Does anybody still remember the WEC? Yeah? No? Raise your hand. This all-around fighter was a stud, defeating his opponents with chokes, TKOs, KOs, but ultimately it was his highlight reel fights with Benson Henderson that made him remembered. A lot of people were excited to see Pettis join the UFC rankings. An ultimately disappointing debut for Showtime as he lost to Clay Guida. The UFC did their most to push this rapid star up the ranking. He had a lackluster split decision victory over Jeremy Stevens, and then he annihilated Joe Lozon and Donald Cerrone to punch his ticket in to a title shot. Yes, if we go back and look at the current rankings, Jeremy Stevens and Joe Lozon weren't even top 10 fighters, and Donald Cerrone was, well, Donald Cerrone. He eventually defeated Benson Henderson in what I would consider one of the worst title fights in UFC history, but alas, he was a champion. So okay, you may be thinking to yourself, he's still beating great fighters. His only title defense came against Gilbert Melendez, a person who went 1-6 in the UFC. He then lost to Rafael Dos Anjos on his next fight, but there is no way to consider Pettis a great champion. 3 fights against mid-tier fighters, a first-round submission victory over Benson Henderson, fluke, and then a title defense against Gilbert Melendez? Not a chance. Not on this list. Number 3, Sean Steroid Sherk. Sean the muscle steroid Shark? Something Shark and Sherk? What's his name? Sean Sherk is actually the fighter with the best record on this list. And even making this video, I sit here and ask myself, is this really an appropriate place for Sherk? I mean, he started when the UFC was just starting out in their lightweight and welterweight division. He looked intimidating with his muscles and veins, and look at those traps. Who could look at them? I mean, look at the shrugs this guy did. And he was kind of intimidating with his cardio workout. So why is he number 3? Why do I consider him the 3rd worst lightweight division champion of all time? Let's start by saying he only has 4 losses in the UFC to arguably some of the greatest of all time. Matt Hughes, Dick, GSP, BJ, and Frankie. So then how is this guy the 3rd worst? Well, young shark, the answer lies in the words lightweight division. You see, back then, men who were 5'6" were accepted to fight in the UFC's welterweight division because they had so much muscle and couldn't burn it down. Stocky build helped the wrestlers get some victories and eventually become champions. Matt Hughes, Matt Serra, maybe? Is that true? I don't know, he's short. And that's exactly who Sean Sherk was. A short, stocky, steroid-infused MMA product that relied on his sheer steroid veins to frighten opponents into submission. He beat Kenny Florin at UFC 64 on October 14th, 2006 to win the belt. And before that, Jens Pulver, hey, we mentioned him, vacated the belt in 2002, making a 4-year hiatus for this championship. Off to a good start, someone would say for sure. He could have changed the motive for the belt, ran with it with pride, defended it with honor. Instead, he defeated Hermes Franca. And was booked for steroids before there was a real system to detect steroids within the UFC. Sherk was booked for steroids before USADA. Imagine the amount this man must have had. And honestly, who knew how long this guy was on the juice? Either way, what an utter disappointment for a guy who could have actually became one of the most well-known champions in the division's history. Number 2, Conor McGregor. Yes, feed me McGregor stands. How does it feel knowing I put Conor as 2? Mr. Notorious was an exceptional talent in the UFC's featherweight featherweight division. He went on a remarkable tear, defeating the likes of Brandao, Holloway, Poirier, and who could forget the ultra dangerous spinning back heel kick master Dennis Seaver. But this isn't a list about the featherweight division. No, sir. It's about the goddamn lightweight division, all of its glory. After winning the featherweight strap in 13 seconds against Jose Aldo, Mr. Notorious had his sights set on lightweight dual gold. A few rumors were floating around with the thought that Conor would flirt with RDA. However, those thoughts were unfortunately stalled. So McGregor instead chose to go to 170 and fight Nate Diaz. Currently 1-1 against the ferocious Nate Diaz. Lost the first fight and won the next. But this is where it gets good, ladies. McGregor 0-0 in the lightweight division got a championship fight against Eddie Alvarez. If you had any sort of hope for the sport, you were hoping Alvarez was going to put on a good fight and expose some of the elements of Conor. Make it competitive, you know? A championship fight, champion versus division newcomer. It's almost expected, right? I mean, we already saw what Nate Diaz did. The game plan was there. All Eddie had to do was execute. Instead, Conor made him look like a third-rate used napkin of a burger place you never like but only go to because it's the only one open past 2 a.m. Eddie was such a chump in that fight. So let's track back here. Conor is featherweight champion. He's 1-1 in the welterweight division and is 1-0 in the lightweight division. Let's give him a little longer shot. Let's see what he could do with this belt as champion, right? Some would say. But what happens next? He vacates the title and does not compete in the division or sport of MMA for 2 whole years. His next lightweight fight, Khabib mopped him. Overall, 1-1 in the UFC lightweight division, 0 title defenses, and defeated arguably number 1 Eddie Alvarez. Going off script for this one, folks. What a joke. What a serious joke. This guy may have been on top in Bellator, but his transition into the UFC was horrible. He lost to Donald Cerrone in his debut, beat Gilbert Melendez and then Anthony Pettis, both by split decision to gain a title shot. Dana, what were you thinking? Like, what were they thinking? This is a joke. He beat RDA in the first round, whatever. Fluke. Let's recap here. At this moment in time, in 2016, Eddie Alvarez, the lightweight champion, is 3-1 in the UFC. His first title defense was against McGregor, who was beaten by a 9-day training camp post-Cuba vacation Diaz, and then sort of, I guess, I don't know, redeemed himself with a majority win. He was absolutely floored by McGregor. It wasn't even close. His only cool fight in the UFC was against Gaethje, but that can't count because that was after his UFC title run. This guy got a title in 4 fights. 1 he lost, 2 he squeaked by to get the title and then stormed RDA to win it. He then lost it to a guy who was using the sport to grow himself and diversify from the talent the sport offered. Goddamn Eddie, I hate you. You were the worst lightweight champion ever.